to the channel Bookworms. Today we have a very special video to introduce you to some spine-chilling books that have sometimes kept me up at night, and something that's very easy or interesting for a beginner who is just starting out in horror. So are you ready to embark on this creepy journey with me? So let's begin. You'll notice that this video is going to be segmented into certain categories of horror and the things that I would recommend you start with if you're looking to get into horror. So I have 7 categories to talk to you about. I have several books in each to offer that beginner introduction into that specific subgenre of horror, and just to give you that creepy element. And if you don't know where to start, this is definitely a good starting point, or as a reference guide, so to speak, that you can come back to or whatever. I'm starting with psychological horror to begin with. This is probably one of my favorite horror subgenres. I have read a number of these over the years, and I think there are some books that are easier than others to really delve into. Some of them have really strange writing or creepy elements that probably don't make sense to people who are just beginning. So I've picked 2 books that I think a beginner might enjoy. They both are different. So if you're just dipping your toes into the world of horror, then starting with some of these psychological thriller books might be a good start. And our first book is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. You'll know that I rant and rave about this book every single chance that I get. This psychological thriller will change how you see horror. It's like a game changer in the industry, in my opinion. I thought that this had such twisted elements and really good for a beginner. It'll keep you on the edge of your seat while you explore the depths and the dark elements of family secrets. It just makes you want to keep reading, and if you read it, I do believe that you'll want more of these horror stories. This will change the game in terms of how you start getting into horror as a reader, or if you haven't delved into psychological yet, then I think this is definitely a perfect beginner book to start with. The second book in this category is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. In a world plagued by an unseen terror that drives people to madness if they see it, the main character Mallory has to guide herself through this river blindfolded whilst they search for safety. So the chilling aspect follows Mallory's journey as she has to battle this external unseen threat, but then also her own inner demons, which forces her to confront her darkness. So this is very psychological. It plays on your mental capabilities, and it highlights the fact that people would do anything to survive. And this story, I think, is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're just beginning within the psychological element of horror. Those are the 2 books that I would recommend for anybody who is trying to find the perfect psychological book. The next category I have is supernatural. These are books that involve supernatural elements, have like ghosts, demons, witches, devil, other paranormal activities. These stories create an atmosphere that is centered on dread and fear surrounding these supernatural entities. So these supernatural books that I'm going to tell you about will transport you to another world. And these books are perfect for any beginner who is just starting to get into the supernatural element within books. The first book that I want to tell you about that I would recommend that you pick up is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is definitely my favorite book by Stephen Graham Jones. So this contemporary novel combines and blends Native American folklore and culture with modern day scares. These four friends are haunted by a supernatural entity that seeks revenge for their past activities, forces them to confront those elements of their past. This book plays on your emotions. It follows the element of fear and how things from your past can creep back in and force you to confront certain actions. I feel like this book does a really good job of blending the Native American culture into, like I said, the modern day scares, in the sense of like supernaturally this probably wouldn't happen, but there is a possibility of these horrors actually happening, if that makes any sense. I'm trying not to spoil these books for you, but give you the best recommendation possible. This was the first book that I picked up by Stephen Graham Jones, and it instantly became my favourite. And after reading practically his entire backlist at this point, this is still my favourite book. This has a hold on me, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're a beginner, because it does a very good job of introducing you to entities. I will say there is an animal scene in this book that is very disturbing. So if you are beginning in this genre, you have to be beware of your triggers. And for me, animal abuse and killing is just not it for me. I had to physically put this book down because it triggered me so much. So this isn't something that is lighthearted in that sense. Do go into it with caution if you are a bit triggered by animals like I am, but as it is horror, this book does a good job of highlighting that disturbing element. So there's that to deal with this book, but it's still a very good recommendation if you're just starting out. Next we have Hex by Thomas Auld Uvet, but this is another book that is perfect for beginners. So in a picturesque town of Black Spring, a 17th century witch's curse still haunts its residents. Catherine is the witch that was killed many years ago, and she still wanders the street with her eyes and her mouth sewn shut, which causes terror. These townspeople have to live with the curse but keep it hidden from outsiders. The curse starts to unravel, which turns the town into a whirlwind of horrors and moral dilemmas. For me, this book wasn't my favorite book that I read, but it does a very good job of introducing you into witches and supernatural elements in a horror book rather than a fantasy book. So in that sense, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. And next up, we have a book that I don't see people recommend all that often, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Is The Summer That Melted Everything by Tiffany McDaniel. This is a haunting coming of age story set in a small Ohio-based town, which is set during the summer of 1984, I believe. This one's heavily based around the idea of Satan coming to town, so its supernatural elements are very much heavy on that. So this atmospheric satanic story explores elements of grief, prejudice, and the consequences of collective fear. And it's definitely one that beginners might want to check out, only because it covers elements that we can face in everyday life in terms of its themes. But it is such an incredible read. It's especially good if you enjoy the devil or anything like that. This book is very, very good, and I would highly recommend checking it out. The next category that I'm going to cover is classic horror. This can be difficult to read due to language and how things are structured within classic books. So for this section, I have picked some older classics and some more modern day classics, just so you can choose which one you're more comfortable with. I know for me, when I was starting to read horror, the classics were a bit difficult. I didn't enjoy Frankenstein, for instance. That book was just so difficult for me to read. and to fully comprehend. But after a while, when I started to get more into the genre and into reading more classics, I felt more comfortable, and I read Dracula and I absolutely adored that book. So for me, I would recommend maybe starting with the more modern day classics, then working your way back. So the first one I'm going to mention is a more modern one, and that's Psycho by Robert Bloch. So this is the novel that inspired the iconic movie. So this was a very chilling tale that can hook you right in the beginning. It did that exact thing for me in the beginning. I was hooked from the very first chapter. This is a book that I read most recently. I felt like putting this book in this because it's definitely a classic at this point, and it's a easier read out of the classics. And like I said, it's such a chilling story. It focuses on the psyche of human nature and what people can do, and how certain events can shape our brains and how we cope and act within the world. So this one is so powerful, and it is completely worth the read if you're just starting out in this horror genre, or if you haven't read it yet and you're a fan of horror. I definitely recommend picking it up. It is such an intriguing read. It's a short read as well, so it's not going to take you days to read it, which is why I thought I'd put it on the list, because it is short, sweet, and creepy. And what's not to like about that? So the next one that I want to discuss, and is the first Stephen King, is Misery. This book I'm saying is a classic because everybody talks about it, everybody knows the basic premise of this story. It's a winter-based book, and I think it's probably one of his better books. This, for me, is a classic horror story that delves into the mind of a obsessed, twisted fan. Annie is the character, the obsessed fan with this writer, and she kidnaps him after his car breaks down and forces him to write a different story or plot to her favorite series because she didn't like the ending. It's a tale that, again, for me, screams real life horror at some points. Like, this could and probably does happen. So I really like when books bring in that real life element. That's where the main scare comes from, and that's why I would recommend picking up this book. It's so worth the read, and you get a story within the story, so it's like you're reading two different stories, but it's definitely a very intriguing read. With Stephen King, I feel like it's really difficult to get into his books, but this one definitely hooks you right in the beginning, and you're constantly trying to find out, and you want to keep reading. So yeah, that's why I would recommend this for somebody who's just beginning. And now we move into the more older classics, and no beginner guide to horror would be complete if it doesn't mention Edgar Allan Poe. So this legendary horror icon wrote many different stories that would be perfect to read, but I am suggesting The Telltale Heart. This is a really short, creepy gothic story. So it's filled with psychological terror as the unreliable narrator delves into and continues to fall within madness, which is driven by his own guilt and the relentless beating of a dead man's heart. So this book, as you can tell, probably sounds very creepy and insane, and that's kind of the reason why I'm putting it on this list. It's probably one of his better books and most famous, and it's short, so it will be perfect for the introduction into the gothic horror element. And the final classic that I would like to mention in this section is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So this is known as the classic of supernatural horror. It introduces us, the reader, into the world of the sinister Hill House. It's a mansion with a history of tragic and paranormal activity. As the terrifying occurrences escalate, the line between reality and nightmare blurs, leaving the characters and us readers questioning where the true evil lies. So it's a true classic, but this is more difficult to read and to sustain reading, I believe. Whenever I read it, it was a little bit more on the difficult side, but I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It's a slow burn, so if you're not into slow books, then this probably isn't the one for you. But as a classic as a whole, it's definitely worth reading if you're trying to get into more classic horror books. And now we're moving on to the survival horror section. So the first book that I'd like to mention is The Hunger by Alma Katsu. This offers a horrifying take on the infamous Donner Party tragedy. So this is a historical horror. It blends supernatural with historical events to create this masterpiece. So this story delivers a bone-chilling take on the original story, following a group of pioneers who must face not only starvation, but a maleficent present as well. So this one for me was so intriguing. I don't usually enjoy historical fiction, but for some reason this one was very good. I feel like Alma Katsu does historical horror very well. I've read a number of her books now, and they're all very good. So if you're interested, then I would say pick up any of her work. But if I'm to suggest one, it would be The Hunger. It's very dark and twisty, and it has the element again of the unseen horror, and you watch people try to survive throughout this journey. It's definitely worth reading if you're just starting out in this section of horror. The other book that I want to mention is a more extreme version of survival horror, and that is The Law of the Skies by Rhonda Mullins. So this offers a more disturbing take on the element of survival. This Canadian horror novella follows a group of school children at the age of around 6 years old who get stranded in the wilderness, where they must confront their own morality and the sinister forces that lurk. So this is very dark and twisted and suspenseful. Like, it's such a good read. It's disturbing. That's literally what it is. It's a disturbing book that, if you are wanting to delve deep into horror as a beginner, then this is where you should start. This book offers such bone-chilling, real-life survival, but mixed with the supernatural elements and the sinister nature that these children have to go through. It highlights how human nature can affect children growing up. But it definitely is worth the read, and that's why I thought I'd mention it within this survival horror section. The next section in this guide to horror is The Haunted House. These aren't necessarily books that are set within a house, but it can focus on haunted locations, houses where characters are facing maleficent spirits, or they have to uncover the dark history of a place. Something a bit different but still focuses on the haunted house element is Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. So this takes horror to a new level. It infuses like the retail madness. It's set within a haunted furniture store, which is set out to look and sound like IKEA. So it is quirky and such a different read. I would really recommend checking Grady Hendrix out, especially if you're a newbie to horror. He has a way of infusing comedy into his horrific stories, but making it still enjoyable to read as a true horror fan. But this book will definitely have you questioning your next trip to IKEA. The next book that I'd like to tell you about is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. This explores the horrific consequences of self-doubt and the lengths somebody would go to escape their own mind. This is a psychological horror that has an element of the haunted house. It delves into the darker aspects of the human psyche and the horrors that can manifest within ourselves. And this is definitely worth reading, especially if you're trying to get more diverse within the stuff that you're reading. The last book within this haunted house segment is Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Shaw. I love this book. This combines Japanese folklore and the haunted house tale, which then creates this atmospheric, creepy story. So this is about a group of friends who gather together and go to this haunted house, and they want to celebrate a certain event. They soon find out that they are trapped by a haunted, vengeful spirit. It follows the group through the house and what they have to endure to finally escape. But it's all twists and turns throughout the story, like around 200 pages, so it packs a lot in within those short amount of pages, and that's why I put it in here. A lot of these books are fast-paced, and I feel like as a beginner, fast-paced books are more intriguing to read and kind of a way to introduce you into this world. So now I'm moving into the more extreme side of horror. I'd just recommend that these books are only for mature readers. I'm not suggesting that you read them if you are under the age of 18. These books are definitely not for the faint of heart either. They are for those who are seeking a more thrilling, chilling and unsettling experience in the reading. If you are looking for some extreme horror recommendations, I would suggest picking up The Cotton Candy Massacre by Christopher Robinson. This is a different take on the extreme horror. It's unique and it offers a dark and twisted ride through a creepy carnival. This book has so many creepy clowns and follows how a certain element that this nightmarish carnival can do on a person's psyche. It has so many killings. It's definitely a slasher based book, so if you enjoy slashers, again, this is another perfect recommendation. I loved this book. This is my favorite extreme book that I've read so far. It's creepy, it's funny, it's also set like a movie. There is parts in the story where it says cut to and everything like that. It's so intriguing and so unique, which is why I thought I would mention it in this video. So definitely pick this one up if you haven't already. It's like the perfect introduction to extreme horror. The final book in this is The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. This extreme novel again pushes boundaries with its disturbing content. It immerses us, the readers, into a twisted, unsettling exploration of a disturbed mind. So the story takes us on a journey as the main character recounts gruesome rituals and the dark secrets of his unconventional family, whilst the true horrific points of his past start to unravel. So this has a lot of dark violence and psychological elements within the book. Ian Banks does such a good job of taking us on a disturbing journey through the mind of our main character, blurring that line between horror and psychological thrillers. So this is definitely worth checking out if you are trying to get into the extreme horror. It's not as dark as some of the other books out there, and I would suggest picking this one up as it's nice and short and it's very disturbing. I'm not gonna lightly say that it's definitely worth reading, but it is disturbing. So with both of these books, do beware of that and remember that these are recommendations for people who are over the age of 18 and who are looking for a more unsettling experience. And the final section that I'm going to cover is polar horror or winter-based horror. So these books transport us to an icy world and isolated settings, and this is where my love for horror lies, because it can cover a range of different things from survival to supernatural entities, scientific horrors, just the icy strandedness of the Arctic and the Antarctica settings. For me, it's the harsh environment that set the backdrop for these terrifying and chilling stories. I have picked two books to end this video on, So the first one is Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. So this takes us on a journey to the desolate landscape of the Arctic, where an expedition team find themselves confronted by an ancient being. So this is like a ghost story that is set within the Arctic and follows the journey of one expedition person who is left on the island by themselves. So it's very atmospheric. It's a tale that delves within the themes of isolation, fear, and so much more. This book definitely has you on the edge of your seat the entire time you're reading it. It's another short book that's fast-paced, atmospheric, and set in winter, so it's like the perfect combination. The last book that I have to recommend to you is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. So this weaves together two chilling narratives, one present-day search for a missing mother and a historical case from the early 1900s. So it's set within a remote Vermont farmhouse, revealing a horrifying truth that transcends time. It explores elements of grief, loss, and eerie mysteries that lurk in the distance. And of course, it's set in a winter setting. The landscape that is discussed throughout this book really does set the scene, and it's definitely a very good read. So these are the two horror books that I would recommend if you're looking to get into polar horror as a beginner. And there you have it. Those are my books that I would recommend for a beginner in this genre. I hope that this video has piqued your interest and has inspired you to delve deeper within horror. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you have enjoyed. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up or subscribe if you like, so I can bring you some more book recommendations. And do let me know in the comments what you might want to see in terms of recommendations from me. But until next time, keep those pages turning and keep delving into the world of horror and embrace the darkness. Bye!